Welcome everyone. This is not the House of Meditation. I'm Sensei Tony, and this is the beautiful villa that I'm staying at right now while visiting our members in the Sangha here in Florida. We're going to be using the Book of Calm Meditation. The space has already been open and blessed, so we're going to go right into it. We are going to use a different liturgy today than we usually use. We have liturgies A through E, which give you a different flavor and taste of the various ancient and modern liturgies that have been composed and which we use. So we're going to be using Liturgy of the Day E. So if you have your Book of Calm Meditation, turn to Liturgy of the Day E. If you don't have it, just follow along. In the name of compassion, creativity, and clarity, may we open our minds to the oneness of all life and seek and serve the one body. Beloved community, all is one.
Thus we have heard.
Let us take refuge.
I take refuge in the teachings of the universe, the Three Principles of Oneness.
Let us make the accord.
I take refuge in the three practices of oneness, which transform suffering.
Let us give thanks.
I take refuge in the community of those who have awakened to the oneness of all life. I share gratitude for this precious life, offering succor to...
We offer succor today to all those who are going through a difficult time in Texas. We remember all beings that are suffering, but we remember especially those today.
And giving thanks for the sacred society of the Dragonfly Sangha.
May all be free from the suffering caused by the delusion of separation, and come to know the peace of abiding in oneness. This is the verse upon opening the homily. The Dharma is incomparably profound and infinitely subtle. May the thoughts of my mind be clear, may the intentions of my heart be open, and may the words of my mouth convey freedom. So tonight's readings, and what I'm going to be doing myself, is using a quote from the Buddha Shakyamuni from one of the sutras, and I'll be using that as the basis for our discussions going forward. So tonight's discussion, the first quote, is attributed to Shakyamuni Buddha in what is known as the Pali scriptures, or sutras. Yet men in anger kill themselves, distraught for reasons manifold. For craze they stab themselves with daggers, in desperation swallow poison, perish hanged by ropes, or fling themselves over a precipice. Yet how their life-destroying acts bring death unto themselves as well, that they cannot discern that this is the ruin that anger breeds. The next quote is by a 5th century Buddhist teacher by the name of Buddhaghosa. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. So the first thing that I want to talk about tonight, and the reason that I have both those readings, is because that second reading by Buddhaghosa is often, in many places, attributed directly to Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, there are some who say that we shouldn't do that we should only use the words that are attributed or found in the Pali Canon. And it's interesting to note that Buddhaghosa himself, living in the 5th century of the Common Era, also often would go off script, so to speak. And while he was revered as a great teacher, that's a criticism that sometimes was laid against him. It is my opinion, it is certainly the way of the Dragonfly Sangha, that we are not a people of the book. That while we honor the writings throughout the millennia that have been written, we do not have a fundamentalist approach to our scripture. So when someone says this is a real quote of the Buddha, or this is a fake quote, I understand what they're saying, but they're basically saying that only the words attributed to the Buddha Shakyamuni in the Pali Canon are authentic. And I don't agree with that. It's important to note too that even those writings were written centuries after the time of Shakyamuni. Our faith is not based on scripture. Our faith is based on the experience of our personal practice. The scriptures, the sutras, everything else that we do is here to support our practice, not the other way around. So for me, the Buddha is still living and speaking, even in writings that are made today. So I just wanted to say that as a preface. So let's talk about anger. So there's several ways that we can approach this. And I think the most important way is to distinguish anger from hatred. Often anger and hatred are put together, and sometimes even in some translations, some folks will do that. I don't agree with that. Anger, for me, is something that is a naturally arising emotion. Hatred is when anger becomes congealed and becomes a way of life for someone. And that's why we call it one of the 3 poisons of the mind. But anger itself does not seem to last that long. No matter how strong the flame may be, it needs a lot of fuel to keep it going. Hatred, on the other hand, has a coldness to it that is different from anger. So that's the first thing I wanted to do, is distinguish between those. So what do we do with anger? Well, the Buddha Shakyamuni and Buddhaghosa are making it very obvious that anger is something that is destructive. We live in a culture and time where anger is often celebrated and even aligned with words like justice. But for Buddhists, anger is an emotion that is created from deluded thinking. So the first way for us to work with anger is understand the interconnected source of anger. Now, if we look at our 4 directions model, we very clearly are able to see the interdependent chain of origination or causation. That anger as an emotion cannot exist without certain thoughts and beliefs to fuel it. Anger, in a sense, is empty without that origin. So when we're working with anger, if we want to eliminate anger from our lives, we can't stop it from coming up sometimes. But what we can do is we can stop, take a breath, take a beat, and look at the origin of our anger. Again, anger arises from thoughts that are delusional. Thoughts that are based on clarity do not create anger and do not congeal into hatred. So the first step for us in working with anger is to simply look at the thoughts that were creating it and maybe the beliefs that are underlying those thoughts. That's number 1. And what I've found is that anger is, I even have this saying because I love cake, anger is the icing on the hurt cake. What I've found is that anger has its origins, as all deluded thoughts do, in a sense of separation. So when I feel separated from you, from my group, from others, or from things that I have an attachment to, there's a pain there that comes in, and that pain then develops into thought processes of being hurt. That I feel that someone has hurt me or something is hurting me. And anger is the way that our ego self protects us from hurt. So, in my experience, every time I examine anger in myself, or I do with those that I give counsel and direction to, I find that there's a hurt underneath there, and that anger is just trying to defend. The ego is trying to defend against that hurt. And likewise, I find that the hurt is based upon a belief that is unclear. So by understanding that, I can begin to question the thoughts and beliefs that are at the source of the fuel of that anger. And of course, the best tool that I can recommend to our practitioners is to utilize the 4 questions, which is a part of the 4 directions system of mindfulness. So that's the first and most important thing. Secondly, the next way that we can look at this emotion of anger is to understand that we can transmute the energy of anger. In Southern Asian Buddhism and Buddhist traditions, the former explanation is the primary way in which we deal with anger. But in the Northern Asian traditions, over time, they also developed a practice that they called transmuting afflictive emotions. And so anger itself can be transmuted. And by transmuted, what I mean is that once we are calmer and clearer, or even while we're in the midst of feeling the anger, we can transmute that anger into something that is not destructive, but something that's creative. When we're practicing the Dharma, we can very clearly understand that our actions are either going to create and bring life, or they're going to be destructive. And so transmuting of an emotion is giving it a life-giving option. Now, what is the transmutation of anger? The transmutation of anger, quite simply, when we transmute it, it allows us to clarify our attachments. So usually when we're angry, there's an attachment to something that we feel that is going to be taken away. And that's what generates that emotion. If we can see that attachments, like aversions, if they're taken too far, cause suffering, then anger can help us to clarify whether or not we're overreaching with what we believe the attachment will give to us. So, for example, if I'm angry about something that I feel someone has wronged me, or maybe someone has hurt me in some way, one of the first things it can do is clarify for me the attachment I have to that person, or the attachment I might have to that object. And it can help me to realize that maybe I've been putting too much on that object, that I've been projecting too much onto that person. And allows me to step back and take a cleaner, clearer view of things. And that in itself will allow the anger to be transmuted into a more life-giving source, a clarity factor. And it allows me to see that maybe I've been putting too much emphasis on this object, or too much into what I think this person actually represents. Because one of the most basic lessons we learn in the Dharma is that it's not wrong to have desires. It's not wrong to have attachments. It's not even wrong to have aversions. But what happens is we make too much out of those attachments and aversions. We give them too much meaning, or we give them meaning that they can't possibly carry. No object and no person can make me happy. It can give me pleasure, or it can give me displeasure, but it can't make me happy. And so anger can be transmuted into the clarification of my attachment. There's one last thing that the Buddha talks about in one of the other sutras, where he tells a mythological story, and it's from the Vipacitta Sutra, Vipaciti Sutra, and it's the battle between the devas and the asuras. And sometimes the devas are spoken about as gods, and the asuras are demons. You'll find a parallel later. You'll find parallel mythologies in the Norse tradition and in the Greek tradition. They basically just change the names, but the mythologies are kind of the same. And in this particular passage, Shakyamuni tells the story about how there was this great battle in heaven, and the chief demon, which is of the name Vipacitti, is captured. And in an amusing and interesting display, the king demon begins to, try to psychologically undermine his captors, claiming that they're weak, claiming that they don't have the strength to finish him off, that if they were stronger, they would just destroy him, and so forth and so on. But each time, the leader of the devas calmly responds. And what I find as a parallel in that story is what I would think of as the way that a martial artist would look at conflict, or maybe even look at anger. As a martial artist myself, one of the things you try to help people to understand is that if you do things from anger, that's going to lead you into a cloudy place where you might feel that it's going to initially give you lots of strength, but actually in the end, what it will do is make you easier to defeat. In fact, there's a trick in martial arts that I used to use back in my tournament fighting days. And I would do something deliberate as skillful means. It was a tournament. One person's going to battle and win over another. I would deliberately do things sometimes to anger my opponent, because I knew if my opponent was angry, it would be much easier for me to defeat him. So one of the things we learn from martial arts is that even when we're facing great evil, or even when we're facing someone who means to do us harm, if we fall into anger, even if in some fashion we might overcome the conflict, we lose the battle. Because what we've done is take a little bit away from ourselves. That when I react in anger, and I use anger as the fuel for my actions, as Buddhaghosa said, it's like holding a hot coal in my hand that I'm going to throw at someone else. It gradually erodes and decays. It's not good. So I hope that was clear, and I hope that was helpful. So, be compassionate with yourself. When you get angry, at the very least, try not to act on your anger. And then, if you can, take time to look at the source of the anger and see if you can uncover the thoughts and beliefs. And if you do something like the 4 questions, you can find a clearer way to address the issue. And likewise, when you feel angry, try to look at the way within which maybe your attachment to this person or this object is exaggerated and not really helpful. This is the word of liberation. We'll now continue with the liturgy. Let us observe the mystery of our communion.
May all live out of oneness. The mysteries are both visible and invisible. In every mystery there is an outward visible sign with an inward spiritual grace. We see one thing and know another.
Suffering transforms into compassion, and permanence transforms into creative change. Emptiness transforms into interdependence. Let us share the Bodhisattva's vows. Beloved, will you continue in the teaching and fellowship of the one body in contemplation and communion?
I will live fully.
Beloved, will you work to restore all people to oneness, the source of our life, liberty, and love?
I will give completely.
Beloved, will you proclaim by word and example the good news of that love which is boundless?
I will love freely.
Beloved, will you seek and serve that love in all persons, loving beyond boundaries and dualities, and see others as yourself?
I will love freely.
Beloved, will you strive for peace among all people and respect the inherent oneness of every sentient being?
I will give myself completely.
Let us affirm that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, not things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the boundless love of oneness.
I confirm the reality of oneness with my life and love.
We will now offer incense, so please do so at home. And while we're doing that, we're going to chant the Namo Amida Butsu, the Nembutsu mantra. Namu Amida Butsu. Lotus abide. Between sunbeam and shadow, the great mystery unfolds. Make life your treasure.
Praise be.
Praise be. Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight for this special meditation service. As always, if you are in need of counsel, direction, care, please contact us through the Ask Sensei Tony website, AskSenseiTony.com website. And if you are interested in becoming a member of our community, we're going to be having a precepts retreat, which we hold every spring. And so contact us about that. If you are one of the few that have chosen to follow a call to serve others, we have a beautiful training program that's been in existence for over 20 years, where we train folks to become magicians of mindfulness and servants of love. So thank you again. I wish you all